Welcome to this podcast for answering question 3 for the Edexcel Unit 3A surgery paper for GCSE History. A PDF version of this video can be found on relentlesshistory.wordpress.com, and further resources and links can be found on the website or by following me on twitter.com/greatinhistory. I think it's well worth noting that typically students perform less well with this question than in other questions in the surgery paper, chiefly because they misunderstand the nature of the task set. If we have a look at the question, we can examine it in more detail. For a number of years, the question has been, how far do sources B and C suggest that something within source D was followed, or was acted on, or resisted? Whatever it is, question 3 is a cross-linking exercise. Other examples of the questions would look at sources C, D and E, and how far do they agree. Whatever the question and its phraseology, it is asking you for question 3 to review the three sources against one another and looking towards cross-linking and showing the connections between them, where they agree and where they disagree. It's not just what they're focusing on, but how far they agree or disagree that's critical. You need to be using about 15 minutes here. If we have a look at the mark scheme, we can see to do well and to do the highest marks, first off, you need to cross-reference, focusing on content. So if we have a look very carefully, we can see here that we're talking about cross-referencing focusing on content, or cross-referencing focusing on the source, in particular the nature of the sources. So you can either examine the content of what's said in the sources and compare them, or compare and contrast what the nature of the sources are to judge how far they agree or disagree. The top level answers actually provide evidence of both. Simply stating what the sources are won't get you higher than a level 2. Providing a weak conclusion at the end about how far they agree or disagree will get a high level 2, but not much more. You need to be doing it throughout, and we'll see that in an example answer. Here we have our three sources: source B, source C and source D. I've circled D because that's our gate opening here. If we have a look, source D was identified as the one we have a fix to compare to B and C. So here for source B we have an illustration showing Lister's carbolic acid spray at work. Source C is an examination of Lister's work through one of his assistants, and then it's a lecture by Louis Pasteur, how to prevent infection. When we're examining these sources, we have to understand the impression it gives us as a good starting point. But then we also have to think about, to do well, the nature of the sources and what that might tell us. Take for example B. It's a picture of carbolic acid being used. Now that would indicate that we see a strong support between what Pasteur is saying here about stopping the spread of disease and this. However, if we think about it carefully, it could do the opposite. It's a picture, illustration for one of Lister's books. But does that tell us that it was actually happening, or that it was something that was wanting to happen? Almost like a positive reinforcement of the message. When we think of it like that, it changes our ability to perceive the source in a different way. Let's have a look at an example answer. The first paragraph, or the first section, is a bit inconsequential. Here the student attempts to create the context. He says, due to the development of anaesthetics, more complex operations took place. However, the more patients survived the operations, many died soon after as a result of infection. So he's setting the context of the scene. This wasn't understood by many until Pasteur and his germ theory came to light. Pasteur knew that germs were everywhere, When they settled in the right conditions, could multiply and infect. Now here we see the student attempting to create a context. It's not really required. Saying what source D would have stated would have been better to provide a comparison to the other two sources. Where we see in yellow, we begin to see him actually answer the question. Source B seems to be in favour of Louis Pasteur. It would have been better had he said source D. But he's giving us a comparison. He's cross-linking now, and he applies evidence as we see in green, showing us surgeons taking the greatest care during an operation, disinfecting hands of all involved as well as the instruments used, telling us that they acknowledged Pasteur's advice and acted accordingly. So he's linking now between source B, the picture, and source D. Pasteur's advice could not, on the other hand, have been taken by the surgeon in source C. So again, cross-linking between Pasteur's advice in D and what's been stated in C. We are told of a story of the man who refused to wear a clean coat during lectures. Surgery and doctors, many doctors refusing the advice of Lister and Pasteur, seeing it as so much hard work. So again, he talks about the ward sponge, and again links that further to what was stated in source D. So we see cross-linking now between C and B back to D. Please note the error here. Source B, although it's a picture of the use of Cavolac spray, still the advice of Pasteur is not sunk in. All the surgeons are dressed in everyday formal clothes. Who knows what germs the surgeons themselves may have brought in. Now please note what I've said here. How could it be improved? He talks about the picture of the source, but actually if he had examined the nature of the picture and said, hold on a second, is it what really happened or what people wanted to happen? That would offer a more substantial piece of evidence for analysis. Ultimately, this answer would get a level 3, typically 8 out of 10. Please note the conclusion. All in all, source B shows surgeons and doctors are taking into account that germs cause death, but they're only making slight changes. So here they're saying they are in agreement, but not in full agreement. It's a long road ahead towards antiseptic and aseptic surgery. If the surgeons in source C follow the example of the surgeons in source B, Pasteur's advice will sink in eventually. That last section is not really needed, but could have said that source C shows that there's still a great reluctance and just reaffirm the original point. The key thing is to have a look very, very carefully at the nature of the source as well. Who's saying it? What type of source is it? Why would that make a difference? Not just the content. I hope this has been useful and it helps with your revision. Yes.